Hello. In today's lecture, we're going to go through the two phases, phase 3 and phase 4 of the framework, executing and monitoring. So up to this point, we have looked at the initiating phase and created a scope statement. We have gone through the planning phase and looked at the WBS and the document that gets created through Smartsheet. And now we're going to, if I can get my, there we go, get my slides to advance. And today we're going to look at the actual execution of your plan and how to monitor it. All right, so there's a couple different tools that we'll use as these two phases get implemented simultaneously. And so heads up, there's a song on this next slide. All right. So just a little fun. You want to check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? The idea here is just a fun way to kind of think about monitoring. And so it's really, let's monitor, let's put some tools and apply some tools in order to catch problems early so we don't have, big issues, time schedule issues, resource issues, those types of things. Things are going to come up. And this is really kind of the monitoring tools that we're going to talk about really go back and help support those triple constraints that were mentioned earlier on in an earlier lecture, where we're trying to balance the scope statement with the resources available and the time that we have, right? And so monitoring those to make sure that those stay kind of in balance with one another, and then being able to put some things in place if we see some things not in balance, right? And so we can try to catch problems early is the whole idea here. All right, so there's just the three tools that we're going to look at. The first tool of action items is really more of just a heads up for you. Typically, this doesn't get used in this particular class, but it is a tool that project managers will use. And so I want to introduce it to you just so you're familiar with it. But again, it's not an expectation during this semester for the projects that we use. The other two, status reports and team meeting and team minutes, are something that you'll actually implement during the semester. So an action item is something that comes up that you didn't really plan for. It's not on your WBS, but now at this point in the project, you've identified it as something necessary, and so you have this action item now. And so how you handle this action item, you don't have to redo your plan, and get into your WBS and redo any of that. What's suggested is that you actually just start kind of a side list. And this is just something that you would do in an Excel document. And you'd identify, what the activity is that needs to be added to the list. And then you essentially do some of the same things that you would on your WBS. So you identify the activity, and you can see some examples. The activity can be to resolve an issue, to find something out, go get some additional information, whatever it might be. So you identify that activity, and now, just like you would in your WBS, you assign somebody to this activity, this action item. And then you track it to make sure that it does get resolved or it does get completed. And so again, that's the idea behind the action item and the action item log. Some more kind of specifics that you might have within your log is some dates associated, when it was created, the title, when it needs to be completed, who was assigned to, those types of things. And then once it is resolved, identifying what that resolution is, and the date that it was resolved. So again, it's just a tracking system to make sure that these additional things that come up during a project are getting done. But again, not necessary to redo your whole plan for these types of items. The action items sometimes arise out of discussion at project team meetings. just things that we didn't think of. We've never done a project like this before, and so things are going to come up, and so we might need to create an action item for those. The next tool that you will actually use in this class are status reports. All right. So a status report is just a communication tool that the team will fill out and submit to the client. Okay. And so in our case, you'll just submit it to myself or the TA. But there's a template in Blackboard that you'll use that identifies kind of the status at a given time of a project. And I'm actually going to pull up an example or the template so you can see what this looks like. All right, so here's the status report that you'll see in Blackboard, the template that will have you fill out. So obviously you'll just kind of fill in the date, who's it to, so typically it's to the client or other key stakeholders that you would think are, you're wanting to communicate to. Then the project team would be here, and then the reason would just be status report and then the project name. All right. And so those are pretty kind of self-explanatory. Essentially, the first thing is you're going to give your project a color and that indicates kind of the status, just at glance for the client to say, okay, are we good? Not so good. So a green indicator would indicate that everything's on schedule, things are running smoothly, we haven't hit any bumps along the way. All right, we're hitting all of our milestones, those types of things. A yellow indicator would indicate that we're not necessarily off track, nothing terrible has happened, but we're potentially, could be delayed in the near future because of some missteps. But so it's kind of a yield, it's kind of a nothing to be alarmed with. All right, but just to give some honest communication to the client so they know exactly where the project stands. Red is indicating that there are some things that aren't going as planned, whether it's the schedule, the resources, right? So we've hit some major bumps along the way, or we've hit a major bump since the last time we've talked to the client. And so we would potentially give it a red indicator at that point. And then the rest of the document then just goes to kind of explain potentially the indicator. And so you might talk about the milestones that have been reached, major things that have been accomplished up to this point, and then upcoming milestones. So things that are on the horizon, the next kind of things that we're focused on. If you are yellow or red, the slipping tasks or slipping action items, we would expect to see something there, kind of what's causing this status, what has slipped, what hasn't gone right. And so there's where you would put that explanation in for the client at that point. If you are a yellow or a red, potentially would have something under the new action items created, potentially to help get us back on track, to resolve some issues, whatever it might be because of that status indicator. If you're green, potentially wouldn't have anything in those two areas. If you're green, you might not have a slipping task, and you might not have any new action items that have been created. So leaving areas blank is definitely acceptable. And then the last one is top concern at this time, right? So again, this is something that regardless of your indicator, you should have something here. Kind of what is our focus at this time? What are we really wanting to make sure gets done? What's a concern of ours, right? And highlighting that for the client. We really want to be honest in this communication. It's not fun giving a yellow or red indicator to a client, but we want to keep them in the loop. We want to let them know the truth so they're aware of what's going on. If we keep saying everything's great when things aren't, at some point they're going to figure it out, whether it's when we don't have the project done when we said we would, or we aren't meeting all the requirements that we said we would, right? And now this becomes a big issue and a trust issue and a relationship issue. And so, if we think about projects in the future, right, they're going to be reluctant to potentially use you in future projects because of this lack of communication or this essentially lying about the status of a given project at a given time. So status reports, again, we want to reflect an accurate picture and talk with the client often, especially when it's a yellow or red indicator, to make sure that we can get these things resolved in a satisfactory kind of manner. Okay, so that's what the status report template will look like that's out there on Blackboard. And you'll be required to do those several times throughout the semester at given dates for the different projects. But you need to be familiar with kind of the expectations. Weekly status reports are very common, but again, this is something that you would indicate in your scope statement, your communication plan, and you would indicate how often you're going to be providing those, or maybe the client will request how often they want to provide that, but that would be documented in that scope statement. The last monitoring tool that we'll use during the semester and that project managers and project teams use are team meetings and meeting minutes. So there are templates for these two items, and essentially the team meetings, you'll have an official team meeting for every project in this class. You'll obviously hopefully have more team meetings than just the official ones, but I will give you dedicated class time to have those meetings. For those dedicated time slots that we have during actual class time, you'll be required to create an agenda, a meeting agenda for that particular meeting. What is the purpose of the meeting? What are we trying to get accomplished during that meeting? And essentially this can just be a Word document that has, a list of topics that we're going to kind of charge through. If there's people that we want to assign to each topic who's going to lead those topic discussions, you can put that on your agenda. If the meeting is an hour, you can put time, we're going to talk about this for 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to talk about this next topic for this long. All right, so you can put some of those general details in your agenda in just a very basic format. Following that meeting, during that meeting, you'll have someone that's going to kind of write down kind of the outcomes of those different topics. So if, one topic that you're going to discuss is the solutions that you've identified as a team, somebody needs to be taking note of kind of that discussion, things that were brought up, maybe the ultimate decision under that topic, and following the meeting, they will take that agenda that you originally created, and underneath each of the topics, put a summary of what was talked about and what was decided upon, right? And then you'll post that to Smartsheet when I kind of assign that for your group. So essentially, anytime we have a meeting, you'll have a meeting agenda and then the meeting minutes. And the purpose is to kind of keep us on track during meetings, to make sure that we're using our time effectively and we're getting through the main discussion points. And also for, there are going to be times where a team member can't make it to a meeting. All right, whether it was a plane, maybe they knew they couldn't make it, or maybe it was an emergency and they weren't able to make it. So now they can get caught up to speed by going back and looking at the meeting minutes and knowing what was discussed. All right, so the meeting minutes becomes a good tool for that purpose, and a good documentation tool for us to go back to as a team if we do have some issues that we can't remember how we resolved it. Potentially the meeting minutes might provide some of that guidance. And so those are also good tools to use during the monitoring and executing phase to make sure that things are staying on track and that we're documenting those things. All right. So some things that we want to kind of think about during the executing and monitoring kind of cycle, as we kind of cycle back and forth from those things, is making sure that we're looking at our plan, our WBS, and looking at what we planned to do versus where we're really at, kind of that reality, and kind of what's called this gap analysis, and seeing you know, are we on track? Are we not on track? What can we do to get back on track? And we might have to create an action item for that to help us get on track. But the status reports and the meeting minutes, or the meetings and meeting minutes, are all just tools to kind of force us to put some structure and make sure that we're staying true to that schedule. And if not, making adjustments to it at that point. But making sure that we're communicating not only with our team, but also to the client throughout this cycle, to make sure that they know, what the status is at any given time, and being honest with them about that status. Right? So that's the monitoring and executing phase of the framework. So again, you have the tools available. We'll be practicing these tools during the semester several different times. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you.